Lonely Cowboy saved a native woman, but the next morning she was on top of him aggressively. Dane Corbett woke to the cold kiss of steel at his throat. For a moment, he thought it was the dream again, the flash of gunfire at Fort Bowie, the boy named Elliot falling into the dust. But this was real. The air smelled of smoke and damp canvas. The weight on his chest trembled. Alive. A young Apache woman straddled him, her breath ragged, a knife shaking in her grip. Dust streaked her cheeks. Blood crusted along her arm, but her eyes black. Steady. Burning never left his. "You're a soldier," she rasped. "You hunt me." Dane didn't move. "If I hunted you," he said softly, "you'd be tied, not sitting on me." The knife quivered between them. Then the smallest thing broke the silence, her swallow. Dry and uncertain, outside, the desert wind hissed through the red rocks, carrying the sound of two lives that had just collided. The wind outside the tent carried the dry hiss of sand scraping over stone. Dawn came thin and gray, leaking through torn canvas, touching the man and woman frozen in the dim light. Dane Corbett raised his hand slowly, his voice rough from disuse. "If I meant harm, you'd already be bleeding." The girl said nothing. Her wrist shook under the weight of the knife, the tremor of hunger and fear. When her strength faltered, he moved, not quick, but steady, catching the blade between two fingers and setting it aside. She backed away, eyes wide, chest heaving. He didn't chase her. Instead, he reached for the kettle by the fire pit, poured what little coffee was left into a tin cup, and slid it toward her across the dirt floor. "Drink," he said. "It's bitter, but it'll keep you standing." For a long while, she just stared, weighing every motion like a trapped animal. Then, slowly, she took it, sipped, winced, and looked at him again, less fury now, more exhaustion. Outside, the Dragoons spread under the awakening sun, jagged cliffs, the color of dried blood, mesquite trees twisting out of rock, bones of old cattle half buried in sand. The smell of iron and sage filled the air. Dane stepped out of the tent, his shadow long against the dirt. 6 years of solitude had worn him down to silence and habit. The army had left this land, but it still whispered of orders, shouted, boots marching, bodies buried under shallow dust. He ran a thumb along the scar under his jaw, the souvenir of a night ambush that had taken everything but his life. Since then, he'd stayed among the red hills, surviving off rainwater and the ghosts that visited him in sleep. Behind him came a sound, faint movement, the scrape of feet. The girl had crawled to the doorway, wrapped in his old army blanket, watching him. Her face, though grimy and bruised, held a kind of fierce grace. Strands of black hair clung to her cheek, her lips were cracked, her gaze bright with a question she hadn't yet decided to ask. He offered no words, just nodded toward the ridge where sunlight poured like molten gold between the rocks. "That's Fort Bowie down there," he said quietly. "About a half-day's ride. You'll find soldiers still sniffing around." Her eyes narrowed. "You one of them was," Dane answered. "Not anymore." She seemed to weigh the word "was," like tasting a bitter fruit, then turned her gaze toward the horizon. In that shared silence, the desert felt alive, wind whistling through mesquite, a hawk's cry above, the faint creak of leather from Dane's gear. It was the kind of silence that held both threat and possibility, like the pause between thunder and rain. He looked at her once more, at the stubborn line of her jaw, the defiance hidden in fatigue. He didn't know her name yet, but something in her eyes reminded him of why he had stopped fighting and why he might have to start again. By midday, the sun pressed down hard enough to turn the air into glass. The tent shimmered against the light, seams stretching with each breath of heat. Inside, Dane sat sharpening his knife, not because he needed to, but because silence demanded something to do. Across from him, the girl crouched near the fire pit, knees drawn up beneath the blanket, watching him like a cornered lynx. Every small motion of his hand caught her eyes. "You should eat," he said finally. He tore a piece of dry cornbread and set it on a tin plate, pushing it toward her. She didn't move. He sighed. "I'd poison myself first if that makes you trust me faster." The corners of her mouth twitched, though she didn't smile. Hunger won over pride. She reached out, tore off a bite, chewed slowly. When she spoke, her voice cracked, as if her throat had forgotten the shape of words. "Why help me?" Dane didn't look up. "Because someone once told me to save a life if I ever got the chance. Soldiers don't save. They take." Her English was rough, uneven, but the edge in her tone was sharp. He met her gaze at last. "Not all soldiers keep the uniform on after they burn it." For a while, only the sound of the wind filled the space, brushing against canvas, stirring dust motes in the sunlight that slanted through the opening. He studied her in that dim glow, the smudge of blood on her sleeve, the raw lines of rope burns around her wrists, the faint tremor of exhaustion she tried to hide. Beneath all that, something stronger held her upright, not just fear, but pride. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, eyes narrowing. "Nita." He repeated it softly, tasting the syllables. "Nita. It means bear," she said, chin lifting. "The one that fights back." A small silence followed, heavy but not hostile. "Seems about right," Dane murmured, and that drew the faintest spark from her eyes. Outside, the cry of a hawk spiraled down the ridge. Dane stepped out to the sunlight, squinting toward the distant cliffs, where the wind carved red smoke from the rocks. Nita followed, wrapped tight in the blanket, her feet bare against the sand. The world spread endless before them, no sound of men, no trace of law, only the dry whisper of the desert. He turned to her. "You came from east or west?" "East," she answered. "Took me." She pointed to the bruises on her wrists, the words heavy with anger. "White men." Said I belong to them now. Dane's jaw tightened. He said nothing, but the muscle under his scar twitched. She studied him, noticing that small reaction. "You not like them. I was one of them," he admitted, voice low. Then I stopped listening. Her gaze lingered on him, not trusting yet, but curious in a new way. The sun caught in her eyes, turning them to amber for a heartbeat. A gust of wind passed, lifting dust between them like smoke. He broke the quiet first. "If you plan to kill me later, at least wait until after dinner." That earned him a soft sound, not laughter exactly, but something close. For the first time since dawn, Dane felt the air inside the tent ease. The distance between them, though still wide, no longer felt like a wall, just a space waiting to be crossed. When night came, the desert turned blue and endless. The fire burned low. Nita slept curled under the blanket, one hand still resting near the knife. Dane watched her from his corner, the flicker of flame painting her face in golden shadow. He whispered to the quiet, "You were right, Elliot. Maybe saving one life does count for something." Outside, the coyotes began to sing. Days passed like the slow crawl of sunlight across the canyon walls. Morning brought wind and dust, nights brought cold, and the groan of old timbers in the tent poles. Between those hours, something fragile began to take root. Nita no longer kept the knife by her throat when she slept. It rested by her side instead. Near her open hand, a silent truce. Dane noticed, but said nothing. He moved through each day with quiet purpose, fetching water, mending the saddle straps, tending the half-starved mule that grazed near the creek. Sometimes, when the wind carried voices from far away, echoes of cavalry drills from Fort Bowie, the clang of a hammer on iron, he'd stop working and stare into the distance until she called softly. "You hear ghosts?" He'd smile without humor. Something like that? It was on the 5th morning that he began teaching her words. He pointed at the bucket beside the well. Water. She frowned. Repeated it. Water. Good. Now fire. He touched the flame, drew his finger back. Hot. She chuckled. The sound light but unfamiliar, like a bird testing its first song. Hot. She echoed, then pointed at him. Teasing you cold. He laughed. A rough, unused sound that startled them both. Haven't heard that one in years. Their lessons became a ritual, every evening, while the sun slid down behind the Dragoons. Dane scratched words in the dust with a stick. She'd copy them, sometimes wrong, sometimes perfect, her tongue rolling awkwardly around English syllables. In return, she taught him Apache. Shash, she said one night, pointing at herself. Bear. Shash, he repeated, mangling the sound. She smirked. You say it like an old man. He bowed slightly. Then I must be one. In the evenings, the two would sit by the fire. The flames cast their shadows high against the canvas, flickering shapes of two people learning how to speak again, not just in words, but in presence. He found himself watching her hands as she worked the way she stripped bark from branches, the way her fingers moved with quiet precision when she cleaned the old rifle. Those hands had seen captivity, hunger, and fear. Yet they moved like they still trusted the world to respond. Once, while mending the strap of his holster, she asked, "Why you live alone?" He didn't answer right away. The fire crackled. The smell of mesquite, thick in the air. Finally, he said, "Because I was good at it." Then, softer, "And because a bad order cost men their lives. One of them was like a brother." She tilted her head, eyes steady. "You give order." "Yes." "He forgive you." "No." He looked into the fire. "But I still hear him." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she reached out, placed her hand gently on his shoulder, not as comfort, but as acknowledgement. A gesture that said, "I see your wound, but I won't pity it." It was the first touch that didn't come from fear. Later that night, the desert wind carried the smell of rain that never arrived. Dane woke to find her humming low, a melody made of breath and memory. "A song?" he asked. She nodded. "For rain, my mother sing. It works. Sometimes." He smiled. "Then keep singing." Over time, laughter came easier. She began to mimic his gruff expressions, calling him stubborn man when he refused to rest his injured leg. He'd mutter something about Apache bossiness, pretending to be annoyed. One evening, he set up a tin can on the fence post and handed her his revolver. "Let's see what you can do." She hesitated, the weight unfamiliar in her palm. "It's not for killing," he said. "It's for living." She squared her shoulders, aimed carefully, fired. The can jumped off the post, spinning into the dust. Her eyes widened, half in disbelief, half in joy. He grinned, feeling something ease inside him that had been locked tight for years. "See? Told you." When she laughed, a clear, surprised sound that echoed against the red cliffs, Dane felt the desert breathe again. For a moment, the ghosts of Fort Bowie were quiet. That night, as they sat under a sky heavy with stars, he murmured to the dark, "You see, Elliot, this time I'm teaching right." Nita didn't understand the name, but sensed its weight. She looked at him, her voice a whisper. "You still fight your ghosts?" "Maybe," he said, "but they're losing ground." The wind swept through the canyon, soft and endless, carrying away the smell of smoke and regret. By the time the fire burned low, she was leaning lightly against his arm, half asleep, her face turned toward the embers. Dane stayed awake, watching the glow fade, realizing that the emptiness inside him had begun to change shape, not gone, but no longer hollow. Outside, the first drop of rain touched the dust, vanished before it could leave a mark. The peace ended the way desert peace always did, with rumor and gunpowder. Dane rode down to Gray Bluff at dawn. The sun still low. The land washed in pale gold. The town smelled of sweat, smoke, and suspicion. As he tied his mule outside the trading post, voices drifted from the porch. "Corbett's gone soft." One man muttered, "He's keeping a squaw up there in the hills." "Damn fool hang for that." Another replied, "Army still pays for runaways." Dane kept his eyes down, but his hand tightened on the strap of his saddlebag. He bought salt, a spool of thread, and a new box of ammunition. When he turned to leave, he caught a name he hadn't heard in years: Rhett Calloway. He froze. Calloway had been a trader in the Army days, one who sold stolen rifles. Sometimes, people, Dane had once reported him. The man had disappeared before the court-martial, vowing they'd meet again. When the tables turned, now the tables had turned. That evening, Dane saw it, 3 dust plumes curling over the ridge, sunlight flashing off rifle barrels. Nita spotted them too. She dropped the bucket she was filling at the creek. "Riders," she said, eyes narrowing. Dane lifted his spyglass, jaw tightening. "Calloway. And 2 men I don't know." Her hand went instinctively to the rifle. "They come for me." "Maybe," he said, "but they'll leave with nothing." He moved quickly, checked the revolver, loaded the Winchester, filled the lanterns. His motions were calm, but his heartbeat thundered. The sound of hoofbeats grew clearer, the dry earth shaking under them. When the 3 men appeared at the top of the hill, the sky was burning red with sunset. Calloway reined in first, tall in the saddle, his grin cutting through the light like a knife. "Well, I'll be," he drawled. "Corbett, the ghost. Didn't think you'd crawl out from under your shame." Dane stood on the porch, Colt loose at his side. "You don't belong here, Rhett. I hear you're harboring one of mine," Calloway said. "Spitting tobacco. Little Apache girl. Name don't matter. The Army's paying good money to bring her back." Nita stepped out beside Dane, the rifle clutched tight. "I am no one's," she said in a steady voice. Rhett's eyes flicked toward her, gleaming with something between greed and hate. "Still got that fire in you." "Huh, shame to waste it." Dane's voice hardened. "Turn around." Rhett laughed. "Or what? You'll give another bad order and get more folks killed." The words hit like a hammer. Dane didn't flinch, but something in his eyes changed a steady work, quiet resolve. "No orders this time," he said. "Just choices." The first shot came from one of Rhett's men. The bullet tore through the porch post beside Dane's head. He fired back before the echo died. The man toppled from his horse. A flash of dust and blood. Nita ducked behind the water trough, part pounding. Gunfire cracked through the canyon, echoing off the red rock walls. Smoke drifted between them like ghosts. "Reload," Dane called, and Nita moved to him, shaking but quick. Her hands found the cartridges, pressed them into his palm. When Rhett leaned out from behind a mesquite tree, Dane squeezed the trigger, missed by inches. The next shot came from Nita. It caught Rhett in the shoulder, spinning him back with a snarl. "You damn half-breed!" he roared. "Keep your head down," Dane barked. But she didn't. She was breathing hard, eyes fierce, hair wild in the wind. The fight lasted minutes that felt like hours. The second gunman charged the tent and never made it. Dane's bullet took him mid-stride. Silence followed, broken only by the groan of wind and Rhett's labored breathing. Rhett staggered to his knees, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "You'll hang for this, Corbett. Killing white men for a squaw." Dane limped closer, the revolver still steady. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But this time I'll die for something worth it." Rhett's eyes narrowed, hate twisting his face. His hand darted toward the pistol at his belt, and before Dane could move, Nita fired again. The shot threw Rhett backward. His gun clattered into the dirt. For a long while, Nothing moved. Only the smell of powder hung in the cooling air. Then Dane turned to her. She was shaking, the rifle still aimed, tears streaking the dust on her face. He stepped forward, took the gun from her hands. "It's over." She shook her head. "He would have killed you." "I know." Her breath hitched. "You hurt." "Not bad." But blood darkened his sleeve, soaking into the old uniform shirt. His legs nearly buckled when he tried to sit. She caught him under the arm, guiding him inside. "You sit," she ordered, voice trembling but firm. "You not die for me." He gave a half smile. "Guess that makes us even." Night came fast. The air turned cold. The smell of rain rose from the ground. Nita tore strips of cloth, pressed them to his wound. Her hands were steady now, her face pale but resolute. Dane watched her work in silence, the lamplight flickering over her brow. "You did what you had to," he murmured. She looked up. "You do this before." "Kill." "Yes." "For money, for orders." She nodded slowly, understanding more than she wanted to. Then she said, almost gently, "No more orders now." He let out a shaky breath. "No, just us." Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. The first drops of rain began to fall, soft and hesitant, tapping against the roof like fingers. Nita tied the last bandage and sat back, exhausted. "Rain," she whispered. "My song work." He smiled faintly through the pain. "Maybe it's the land forgiving us." She shook her head. "Not land. Spirit." Lightning flashed through the tent wall, painting her face in silver light. Dane saw the strength there, the same defiance that had met him with a knife that morning. Only now, it wasn't fear keeping her alive. It was choice. He reached for her hand, and for once she didn't pull away. Outside, the storm broke open, washing the desert clean. The rain kept on through the dark, drumming soft against the patched canvas roof. Each drop found a different rhythm, as if the sky itself were learning how to breathe again. Dane drifted in and out of sleep. Pain burned through his shoulder, dulled by whiskey and exhaustion. Each time his eyes closed, he saw the flash of Calloway's gun, Elliot's face in the dust, Nita's finger tightening on the trigger. When he woke for good, the fire had gone to embers. Nita knelt beside him, a strip of his old shirt wrapped tight around her wrist from recoil. Her hair clung to her temples, damp with sweat and rain. "You should rest," he muttered. "You bleed again if I sleep," she said simply. He gave a tired smile. "That sounds like something a sergeant would say." "I learned from stubborn man," she answered. Adjusting the bandage, thunder rolled across the hills, a long, low growl fading into silence. Through the tense tear, he could see the flash of lightning tracing the edge of the Dragoons' mountains made ghostly. Silver. Clean. "You believe in spirits?" he asked. Nita's hands paused. "Yes. They walk with rain, wash what earth remembers." He nodded slowly. "I could use some washing." She looked at him a long while. "You talk to dead man." "Elliot." "You think he hear you?" Dane's throat tightened. "I hope so. He was 20. I sent him into a canyon. I hadn't scouted right. Ambush took the whole unit." He laughed when I told him to move first. He stared at the fire's faint glow. "I told myself I was following orders. Truth is, I was too proud to admit I was lost." Outside, the rain thinned to a hush. Nita poured water into a tin cup and handed it to him. "You not lost now." He drank slowly, each swallow bitter with smoke and guilt. "Feels like I've been walking in circles ever since." "Circle end when you stop running," she said. He met her eyes. "And you'll keep running too. I run long time," she whispered. "From men, from memory. But rain find me." The way she said it made something shift inside him, a quiet acceptance he hadn't known he'd been craving. Toward midnight, the storm broke apart. The tent breathed cool air. The smell of wet sage drifted in. Nita sat cross-legged by the doorway, staring into the dark, where lightning still flickered over the plains. Dane pushed himself upright with a wince. "You should sleep a while." She shook her head. "Night too loud in here." "Then sit with me," he said. So she did. They sat shoulder to shoulder, listening to the last drops slide from the canvas. "You ever think the land remembers everything we do?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "But rain makes the remembering softer." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe it'll forget me someday." Nita turned to him, eyes dark and clear. "No, not forget. Forgive." The words settled between them, like warmth from the dying fire. He reached for her hand, rough fingers finding hers. She didn't pull away this time. When dawn finally came, it was a thin gray wash spreading over the wet ground. The tent smelled of smoke and rain, and something new, peace. Maybe, or exhaustion that felt like peace. Nita was dozing against the pole, hair tangled, lips parted slightly. Dane studied her face, tracing the dried raindrop on her cheek. He wondered what life waited beyond these hills, whether she could ever walk into a town without fear, whether he could ever stop being the man who'd once failed his command. He whispered, almost to himself, "If I ever meet Elliot again, I'll tell him I kept the promise." Nita stirred. "What promise?" He smiled softly. "He told me once, if you stop fighting, save someone instead. Guess I finally did." She blinked at him, still half asleep. "You not save me," she murmured. "We save each other." The simplicity of it cut deeper than any sermon. He leaned back, eyes on the opening where light began to seep through the clouds. The desert steamed under the new sun. Every rock and weed glistened. The red earth, once dry and brittle, now smelled of iron and life. For the first time in 6 years, Dane Corbett felt the weight on his chest ease, not gone, but lighter, like a wound that had begun to scar over instead of bleed. Nita reached for the coffee pot, poured what was left into 2 cups, handed him one. The liquid was cold and bitter, but he drank it anyway. "Rain stop," she said. He nodded. "Yeah, time to move. Where somewhere the ghosts can't find us." She smiled, small and tired. Ghosts always find, but maybe now. They come friendly. Outside, the world gleamed clean. The rain had carved rivulets down the slope, tiny veins of silver cutting through red mud. Above, the sky opened wide and clear. Dane stood at the doorway, the bandage bright against his shirt. The wind carried the smell of mesquite and wet dust, a smell that felt like forgiveness, behind him. Nita hummed the rain song again, softer this time, almost joyful. He closed his eyes, listening, and for once, the ghosts kept silent. By morning, the Dragoons breathed steam. Mist rose off the soaked earth, curling around the red cliffs like smoke from some ancient fire. The world looked reborn, rinsed, clean of dust and sin. Dane tightened the cinch on the mule's saddle, his wounded shoulder stiff but healing. Each movement hurt in a steady, honest way, pain that promised he was still alive. Behind him, Nita wrapped a faded scarf around her neck, tucking the same knife that had once drawn blood against his throat into her belt. "You sure you can ride?" she asked. "I've been worse," he said, adjusting the reins. "Can't stay here." She glanced at the tent, its canvas torn, the ground still marked by boot prints and dried blood. "This place remembered too much." "Yeah," Dane murmured, "but it also kept us alive." They loaded what little they had, a bedroll, a half sack of beans, his rifle, her blanket. When the mule shifted, Dane steadied it, and for a moment his hand brushed hers. The brief touch carried everything they hadn't said, the shared silence of nights, the trust built in whispers and rain. They mounted together, heading toward the narrow trail that wound west along the ridge. The sun had just cleared the horizon, throwing gold across the slick stones. The air smelled of sage and smoke, and something faintly sweet, the kind of smell that only comes after the desert forgives itself. As they rode, Nita looked back. "You think ghosts follow probably," Dane said, "but maybe they're tired too." She smiled. "Good. I don't want to fight wind." He chuckled, though the sound caught in his chest. "You'd win anyway." The trail opened into a broad view of the valley below Fort Bowie, a silver scar in the distance, glinting in the sun. Dane stopped his mule and looked long at it. The place where his shame had begun now seemed small, almost harmless. He lifted his hat, not in salute, but in farewell. "Rest easy, Elliot," he said softly. Nita turned toward him. "Elliot. The young one. Yeah. He deserved better than I gave." She studied him for a moment, then said, "Maybe he see now. You keep promise." "Maybe he does," Dane answered, eyes on the shining plain. Maybe that's what this rain was for. They rode on. The sun climbed higher, and steam rose from the ground in thin veils that caught the light, turning the valley into a shimmering sea. Each hoofstep made a soft, wet sound, the earth breathing again. Nita began to hum her rain song, low and rhythmic. The melody wound through the still air like a thread tying them to something larger than themselves. Dane listened, smiling beneath his hat brim. "What's it say?" she thought for a moment. "It say, after fire and dust, water come, and with water, life." He nodded slowly. "Seems we're proof enough of that." For a long while they rode in silence. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of new grass. Ahead, the desert spread open wild, untouched, endless. Nita looked up, eyes bright. "Where we go now? Anywhere that doesn't care who we used to be," Dane said. She considered that, then smiled. "Then everywhere." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You've got a way of making the world sound bigger." She touched the scarf at her neck, its fabric fluttering in the wind. "It is big," she said, "but not enough to hide from life." The trail curved west, sunlight pooling on the wet rocks ahead of them. Behind, the Dragoons stood like sentinels, red walls gleaming, their scars hidden beneath the sheen of rain. As they disappeared into the horizon, two figures against the pale sky, the land seemed to exhale. The last drops slid from the leaves, falling into the soft red dust, and for the first time in years, the desert smelled not of death, but of life returning. If this story touched something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Every tale we tell here is a piece of the Old West reborn stories of people who found grace in dust, and hope where the desert refused to bloom. Out here, under the same endless sky, love and redemption still ride side by side. Come back tomorrow for another story, another fire burning in the wide, wild silence of the frontier.